We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.
Welcome to another Planet Holyrood. I'm Paul Hutcheon, the political editor of the Daily Record. I'm joined this week by John Ferguson, who's the editor of the Sunday Mail, and of course Douglas Dickie of the Scottish Daily Express. So I think we're only a few days into Donald Trump's second term, and already I just can't get the inauguration out of my head. Depending on your perspective, it was either the official confirmation of the greatest comeback in US political history, or it was just a freak show of extremists and crazies gathering in Washington to gloat about Donald Trump's victory. But enough about Elon Musk. We'll come to him later. John, I don't know what you think about it, but like, Trump won. He won decisively. It wasn't particularly close in the end. The inauguration was his moment. I guess it's democracy in action.
Yeah, democracy in action to an extent, but I think that it's quite clear that he won with the help of a number of multi-billionaire friends. And I mean, look, yeah, he did win the election, but really, I don't think this is good news for America or the world. He's been quite clear about the fact that he's a protectionist, that he wants to close America off, he wants to impose tariffs on everyone. He's clearly beholden to these tech bro billionaires who were lined up at the inauguration to watch him being sworn in. It's just feels like a bizarre state of affairs. It kind of looked slightly like the cast of Love Island at certain points lined up. That was just the Trump extended family.
Love Island for whack jobs.
Then there's the spectre of Elon Musk there in the background. I mean, Donald Trump is clearly a narcissistic moron. Elon Musk is quite a clever narcissist. They're both quite similar, just one's a bit smarter than the other. I think that anyone that's buying into the MAGA thing, or even the mega thing, which Elon Musk is now suggesting, that make Europe great again, is a fool. I think you're a mugger if you think that this is anything other than bad for everyone.
Doug, people were mocking Biden and Harris for sitting there having to listen to it, and the fact that they wouldn't stand up. But, just to defend them for a second, they did show up for the inauguration. They did the transfer of power peacefully. They were pretty, 4 years ago, Trump didn't show up at Biden's inauguration because he was a pathetic crybaby. Couldn't accept the result, made up a pack of lies about how there was voter fraud and he was cheated out of it. He couldn't even bring himself to show up at Biden's big day. At least they had the decency and the courtesy to do their democratic duties.
It's true that he didn't turn up. Unfortunately, some of his fans did turn up, kind of 4 years ago. But look, I think going back to what you said at the start, Paul, you said it's either a freak show, or, this horrendous freak show, or it's the greatest political comeback of all time. I don't think anyone can argue that it's not up there with the greatest political comebacks of all time, whether you like him or not. I mean, 2 years ago he was down and out. Well, 4 years ago he obviously lost the election to what turned out to be a rather doddery old man who shouldn't have been anywhere near the White House as well. And then 2 years ago, I mean, I think his chances of winning the Republican nomination were slim to none, and yet here he is, once again, the most powerful man in the world. Speaking about, the former presidents there, it was actually, I think it was George Bush who brought the best kind of energy to it. He looks like a kid in a sweetie shop whenever he turns up to one of these things, And it's quite amazing that now people look back on George Bush as this kind of elder statesman, because of course 20 years ago...
he's the Republican moderate.
Yeah, I mean, 20 years ago, Bush was the antichrist to a lot of kind of, people on the left, and now people see him as someone who actually, hark back for the days of the kind of Bush administration. But what Trump is a force of nature. I don't think anyone can argue that. I think what we'll see, he's obviously signed, what was it, 100 executive orders already or something along those lines. These are all obviously primarily impacting on the US. He's pardoned a lot of his supporters. That's getting a lot of, column inches. But at the same time, Joe Biden pardoned his son. Now it is different. A lot of these guys were trying to overthrow the very democratic system which America is built on. But, they're all at it in some ways. And I mean, the whole thing is just, you can't take your eyes off it. It is, on the one hand, completely crazy. And in some ways, it's also objectively hilarious.
Just when you thought the day couldn't get any crazier, Elon Musk goes and does that bizarre salute, which seemed to be dodgy at the time. Some folk thought it was like a Nazi salute. Others are saying it's a Roman salute. I don't know what the truth of it is, but it didn't look good.
I mean, it certainly didn't look good. And, if this was someone else, you would probably have given them the benefit of the doubt. But this is a guy who supports far-right parties across the world. And that is not that's not to use the word far-right wrongly or in a sort of soft way. He is a huge supporter of genuine far-right parties. You can see this in the way that he's supporting the far-right in Germany and other places. So whether or not this was a Nazi salute or an intended Nazi salute, who knows? But if it was, it really wouldn't be particularly out of character or unexpected, given the people that he's quite vocal about being the people that he respects most in politics, and also just all the rhetoric from Trump, from Musk. It's all about immigration, othering people, mass deportations, dividing people. So that is, there is a very sinister undertone to the whole thing, and I don't think it would particularly surprise anyone if it was exactly what it looked like, a far-right Nazi salute.
I think what's most interesting is how the relationship, and I think we've discussed this before, how the relationship between Trump and Musk goes from here. They looked close this week, and Musk says he was in the Oval Office when Trump signed all these orders and whatnot, but there was already murmurings that Trump was getting a bit upped at the kind of President Musk stuff, and can these two remarkable personalities coexist and as part of a government? I think that remains to be seen, and the dynamic between them, and ultimately the dynamic between them is going to have ramifications far beyond the American border. So it's worth keeping an eye on.
Yeah, let's focus then on the Trump issue that the entire world is focused on. How will it affect Scotland? That's the biggie. Looking at his agenda, it's clear that the Trump policy of imposing tariffs on foreign goods, that's a threat to the Scottish economy, particularly the Scotch whisky industry. At the time that we're talking just now, we don't know if tariffs are going to be reintroduced. I know that the Scottish government's concerned about it. The Scottish whisky industry is very concerned about it. Trump's such a capricious, fickle guy that he might decide, I'm going to spare Scotland, and then he might read something on Twitter and decide then to impose tariffs. There's just no way of really working out or predicting if it's going to happen or not.
No, I mean, he's, the one thing is that he's a transactional-minded president. The idea that Scotland's going to get some kind of special deal, I think, is for the birds. I think he probably does quite like Scotland. He likes his golf courses and all that. But does that mean that he's going to give Scotland and Scottish whisky a special deal just because he quite likes Scotland? Somehow I doubt it. The truth is that there is no special relationship, really, and there certainly isn't one with regards to trade. Britain did have a specially legally binding relationship with Europe, but they tore it up a few years ago. And now, bizarrely, you've got the main architect of that, Nigel Farage, sort of cuddling up to Elon Musk and Trump, despite the fact this whole thing was meant to be that he objects to foreign interference in British politics. So I I don't think that Scotland will get anything special off of Trump, whether or not he goes as far as he said he will in terms of imposing tariffs on goods from the UK and every other country remains to be seen.
I don't think that. I don't think John Swinney, since the general election, has put a foot wrong. I think he's at the top of his game. Said that before, but I think in retrospect, I did think it at the time. I thought that he was wrong to pick sides in the US election. I know why he did it. You know, there'd be people in his own party chomping at the bit from to pick sides. But given that it was such a tight election, it could have gone either way. Given that Scotland has to work with the administration, I just felt like it was a fight that he didn't need to pick.
I mean, at the same time, John Swinney runs a devolved administration within the framework of the UK, and Trump's business is going to be primarily with the UK government, and it's how that relationship is going to have a much bigger impact in Scotland than Trump's relationship with John Swinney. Actually, I'm not entirely sure, John. I think Trump is the kind of guy who might let emotion get the best of him. Good for us. I think he might look at Scotland and think, my mother was for there. We should be very proud this morning that the most powerful man in the world is a Scot. But thanks, Scotland. But
we gave the world Richard Nixon and Donald Trump. Amazing.
But I think that relationship with the UK government and how what happens in America impacts here. So for a start, defence spending is probably going to increase. Now that's going to have an impact on Rachel Reeves' ability to spend, which is going to have a potential knock-on impact for the Scottish budget. Man, if we haven't for the SNP, stuff like how if his immigration policies work to the way he wants them to work, is that going to impact on if people see it working here, is that going to push people to reform? Or if it doesn't work there, is it going to be used as a reason why we should people should move away from reform? I think that relationship with the UK government is going to be much more interesting and
I agree with that, actually. I think that the relationship with the UK will probably have a big bearing on whether tariffs are imposed on Scottish industries.
I mean, I don't.
Ultimately, Scotland's not going to be around the table when it comes to discussing tariffs, are they? It's going to be the UK government that will lead all of that stuff.
Obviously, Scotland will be around the table as part of the United Kingdom, but I doubt John Swinney is even on Donald Trump's radar.
I interviewed a Trump advisor the night after he won the election, and his words to me were, Donald Trump wouldn't know John Swinney from a stick in the ground. So I doubt he will even literally know who he is. I think that any trade deal that Donald Trump does will be based on what can he get out of it. And I think we need to see a bit of pushback from the UK and Europe, but not allow themselves to get bullied by this guy into doing anything he wants. He's out demanding that 5% of GDP gets spent on the military. Almost all of that will probably end up in the pockets of American arms companies. So do we really need to do this? Is defence spending not about the right level just now? Because there's an opportunity cost. When you increase funding on the military, you need to decrease funding and other things. And there's also potentially a cost in terms of there's a huge campaign underway to increase military spending to really hype up the threat from places like Russia and China. But there's also the danger of this stuff becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy, and the world is literally getting pushed into conflict that doesn't need to happen.
At the same time, I think Trump's skills as such are as a deal maker, and I think there's an argument to be made that he's probably better placed than anyone to end these conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza and places like that.
Is he really?
I think he is. Yeah, I think that's his forte. His forte is.
Some people would say deal, others would say cave-in.
Well, yeah, but
he's already said I'm not going to get involved in any wars. Well, where's your bargaining position? That doesn't sound like the art of the deal.
By the same token, the same people that moan about America getting involved in all these wars are the first to moan when Trump says, "I'm not going to get kind of, certainly not American boots on the ground." But I think ultimately Trump.
think he was quite good at not getting involved in wars, but I don't know if he's got any particular track record of ending them.
Well, I think we'll see now. I think that is one area where he might exceed expectations. Wars are, it's not good for America. It's not good for Europe. It's not good for the markets that that kind of that Trump relies on to boost the economy. And I think it's in his best interest to bring an end to the conflict in Ukraine. It's in his best interest to bring an end to the conflict in Gaza. But as you say, Paul, whether that is a deal that is
I do agree
good
that
for Ukraine.
He doesn't seem particularly interested in funding the war in Ukraine, and that is the most likely thing that will bring that to an end, probably, with the result being that Ukraine's going to have to give up quite a large portion of land. In terms of Gaza, I think we have a ceasefire now, but I can't see Donald Trump's presidency being good for the Palestinians.
No. Sticking with Trump, of course, Murdo Fraser, the Tory MSP, came up with an idea this week, was give Donald Trump his own Scottish tartan. Is that the game changer? Is he going to refrain from slapping tariffs on our whiskey because we give him a tartan?
What about dual nationality? I think that might be much more up his street. We can make him a new Scot, as the SNP love to say.
Yeah, I just don't think that the mum's Scottishness or a Trump tartan are really going to have any impact on this hard-headed businessman.
I think he'll take it. I think he'll be happy to have it. I don't think he's going to be given anything in return.
Thanks for the tartan. Here's your tariffs.
Yeah.
That's how it's going to work.
Yeah.
So John Swinney had a speech in Glasgow today on the economy and tariffs in the US. They featured pretty prominently in the questions from the journalists. But what was interesting about the Swinney speech was he was talking about an aging population and some of the challenges in the long term with the Scottish economy. One of his ideas is on migration. I think he's calling for a special Scottish graduate visa, which would allow graduates to stay in Scotland 2 years longer than they would otherwise. Now, there's a sort of feeling of deja vu with this because Jack McConnell, when he was Labour First Minister, he had a very similar scheme to this called the Fresh Talent Initiative. The Tories kept that in place for a while. I thought it was quite smart politics because it's something that Scottish Labour have been backing as well. It puts Labour in a difficult position because, of course, the Home Office seemed to be against it. I don't know, to me, it passes the reasonableness test.
Yeah, I think it sounds like a good idea, and it was, of course, something that Labour were talking about. Jackie Baillie made statements to the effect that she would be happy to see some kind of special immigration powers for Scotland to allow this sort of thing to happen. I haven't heard quite so much from Labour about it since they won the election, and I think it would be interesting to see whether it ever actually does happen, because of course, for the civil servants, this stuff's going to become very difficult to implement if you're going to allow people to come into Scotland and have a visa and potentially go on working in Scotland. Does that mean that they're somehow going to be restricted from then moving down to London in 6 months' time? It sounds like quite a difficult scheme to administer, albeit a very good idea. Probably the better idea was that it would be just to have a better visa system for the whole of the UK, potentially.
Yeah, as you know, Paul, I'm a cynic when it comes to anything the SNP does. And I think when you scratch the surface, on the surface, the graduate thing that was already in, I don't have a major issue. When you scratched in this idea of stopping people from living anywhere else in the UK, for me, it comes down to another attempt to just undermine the integrity of the UK, try and grab more powers so the SNP can keep pretending that we're already effectively an independent country. And I think we can all see how this goes. If it were to happen, the SNP set up another government Congo. They pump millions of pounds into it. They employ God knows how many people, civil servants on it. And then 6 years down the line, they say, oh, actually, we can't set it up. We need the UK government to do it, or we need to hand the powers back to the UK government.
But then you look at the Fresh Talent Initiative back in the day, it didn't require any more powers to be transferred from Westminster to Holyrood. It just required the cooperation of the Home Office. and a bit of flexibility for Scotland to suit our own needs. So, I mean, it needn't be a constitutional wrangle. I mean, I think that where John Swinney will struggle is that I think the climate has changed on immigration. Labour think that net migration is too high. They want it to come down, and there has been a clampdown on foreign students as well and their family members. So I think if Ed Cooper, the Home Secretary, was to agree to this, it does seem to contradict UK policy. So, I mean, I don't think it's a constitutional thing. I just, the country has moved to the right on immigration. There's no doubt about it.
Highlights. Has Scotland particularly moved to the right? That's an interesting question. It feels like it's potentially not moved to the right as much as the rest of the
I don't think Scotland's liberal in immigration. And I think, I think that John Swinney's doing the right thing here. Whether it's a popular thing, that's a completely different matter. I think that Scots, people in England, people in Wales, I think generally there's been a shift to the right on these questions.
I mean, I think people in Scotland I think they appreciate the practical argument that we more than the rest of the UK have a aging population that we need people, preferably bright, energetic people coming into the country and keeping the economy going so that we can afford to pay the pensions and public services for all of the increasingly large section of the population that are elderly. And I also think that just because we've had less immigration, that people are less of a concern. People haven't saw the same sort of changes in their local communities potentially that you have in some places in the south of England. So it feels like people, it's just obviously practically a good idea for Scotland to be able to attract bright young graduates to the country. Whether it will happen,
I think the best way to do that, though, is I absolutely agree with you, John. I think one of the big issues in immigration is that we don't, whether they're perceived impacts or real impacts or whatever, we don't really have them up here because Scotland remains predominantly, a predominantly white, very white country. Immigration, barely stretches out with the central belt. Apart from obviously some of the fruit farms and whatnot. But the best way to solve this problem is to make Scotland an attractive place to move to. So, I mean, there's plenty of people coming to the UK, but they're all settling in the southeast of England, or they're all settling down south, and there's a reason for that. And the best way, because you think that that's the best chance for them to make a life for themselves. And I think that, the best way to deal with it isn't with starting to tamper with the immigration rules and creating yet more red tape and more bureaucracy. Make Scotland a better prospect for aspirational people.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's three strands to it. I think it's wrong to see immigration as the silver bullet to an aging population. I mean, it's one strand of it, but I think you have to make it financially attractive for families to have kids. And you look at things like the two-child benefit cap, that's clearly not the case. And also, I think you have to ensure that people who can work do work. You ease them back into employment. So that's a big part of it as well. So you've got those three different strands. All of them have got their own challenges. I think it shows why the country is in the sort of economic mess it's in just now, because the amount of folk on sickness benefits has been growing. It's going to keep growing. We're clamping down on immigration, and it's almost, I wouldn't say there's a stigma attached to having kids, but you wouldn't say that the government's very encouraging of it. Compare it to countries like France and other EU countries. It's just, I think we've got the balance wrong on all those three different things.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the easiest one of those to change in a short amount of time is the immigration one. Really, you need to work on all three.
Maybe we could get Donald Trump in to strike a deal between John Swinney and...
Probably just keep Trump out of things like, families having kids.
He's the deal maker after all.
Yeah, no, I'm much happier if he focuses on Greenland and he can just let Scotland and the UK do their own thing. Just wrapping things up, John, Operation Branchform. Obviously, you've done sterling work on this story. The Sunday Mail, we had our own story last week about illegal curb on Peter Murrell, who's the husband of Nicola Sturgeon. Basically, he's been blocked from selling any property, and that property is the family home he has with Nicola Sturgeon in Uddingston near Glasgow. What did you make of that story, and what are your reflections on where we're at with Branchform?
So of course the situation as it stands is that Peter Murrell's been charged by the police. Nicola Sturgeon and Colin Beattie have not, but they have been interviewed under caution, and we haven't really heard anything else for quite a long time on it. I mean, there's two things that could be happening. Either there are things happening behind the scenes that we don't know about. Nicola Sturgeon, when she was interviewed about this, said that she hasn't heard from the police since she was taken in and interviewed. That she didn't mention whether her soon-to-be ex-husband was in the same position. So it could be that things are happening and this could all be concluded quite quickly, or it may be the case that just, we're in a situation where nobody can take a decision. It does feel like it's been an awful long time now, and that there can't really be any practical barrier to this case being resolved. That it is clearly having a material impact in the functioning of Scotland's democracy and politics to have this thing hanging over the governing party, and it would be in the best interest of everybody that get resolved as soon as possible. And really, I mean, I can remember a few months ago, or in fact, many months ago now, people were talking about whether they would get this resolved before the Westminster election. It now looks like we could potentially be in a situation where it's going to interfere with
which is crazy,
the Holyrood election next year, which, this is just going to fuel conspiracy theories about the UK government using this as leverage to damage the nationalists. The best thing would be that one way or the other it gets resolved. It can't. I'm sure it's quite a complicated case, but it can't be that complicated. We're now many years down the line. The Crown Office needs to decide what they're going to do and do it.
Do you not think, Doug? I see if the SNP and John Swinney drew up a risk register for themselves just now, the NHS would be on it, and so would Branchform, just in terms of political dangers.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I think John's talking about conspiracy theories, that this is, the UK government. There's on the other hand, there's people that think that, people are trying to subdue this so that, the SNP figures aren't arrested, charged and whatnot, all of which is nonsense. It's just taken, an awful long time. But we focus a lot on the damage it's doing to the SNP and the political cost of it. I think ultimately, and everyone in here knows, I'm no fan of Nicola Sturgeon. I'm no fan of Peter Murrell. But there's a human cost to this as well. They've had this hanging over them for 4 years, and in this country we operate on an assumption of innocence until proven otherwise, and it just feels like their reputations are getting kind of dragged through the mud. Now it may come down the line where the situation changes, but as of right now, Murrell was charged in April last year. It's almost a year away, and he's no idea is it going to go to court or is he going to get dropped. I mean, the pressure must be horrific on them, and it's a drain on the taxpayer as well. It's costing a fortune. The police say that insiders at the police say that they've finished their investigation, and it's the Crown Office that are holding things up. Who knows why? But this needs to come to a conclusion, not just from a political point of view, but for the people involved. They deserve, and of course the people who feel that their money has been used allegedly fraudulently, they also deserve an outcome one way or the other. So
I'm reminded of that line, the process is the punishment.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You go through the criminal justice system, you feel brutalised.
Regardless of how it comes at the end.
I think one thing that's an interesting aspect to this as well is that something that's been kind of quite quietly happening behind the scenes over the last few months is that really there's been now a complete clear out of pretty much all of the people that could have been involved, all of the senior figures in the SNP headquarters operation have now left, and that they're currently recruiting a new chief executive. The advert for that job went out a few days ago. It'll be interested to see who applies, and it kind of does feel like the SNP are sort of moving on a bit now under John Swinney, and like gradually whatever the fallout from Branchform is going to be will be kind of lessened by the fact that this was just what is now an old guard whose hold over the party, I think, is gradually diminishing. But that said, I still think it has got the potential to be incredibly damaging generally for the SNP, and it really, I don't think it would be good for the democratic process if this thing was to be happening at the same time as a Holyrood election campaign.
I think Sturgeon's still, to many people, the face of the SNP, regardless that she stepped down nearly 2 years ago. And God, where does the time go? I think she's still, in many people's eyes, the kind of chief nat, if you like. And John Swinney, of course, was a deputy for years. So no matter how much they move on, I think it's still going to have a massive impact.
Interestingly, I interviewed John Swinney a few weeks ago, and I asked him at the end of the interview, do you still speak to Nicola Sturgeon? And he said yes. And I said, do you still speak to her regularly? And he said yes. So they're clearly still in quite close communication. I mean, how much influence she might still have over the party and party policy, I'm less inclined to think it'll be.
I wonder if he still sees her as an asset to the SNP.
Well, bizarrely, I think he probably does. I get the feeling that there are a lot of people in the SNP that still don't really get it. That that Nicola Sturgeon has become quite a toxic personality for nationalism and for the SNP as a party.
Remember her sort of farewell speech, her resignation speech at Butte House, where she effectively admitted that she would not be the person to take Scotland to independence because she'd been seen as a divisive figure. It's hard to argue that her stock has risen since that resignation speech. I mean, Branchform has really had a negative impact on her reputation.
Yeah, and I can't imagine she's very popular as well with a lot of, for example, SNP MPs who are losing their jobs at the last election while watching Nicola Sturgeon get paid handsomely to talk about it on television. I can't imagine that she's particularly popular with a lot of those people who feel that it was Nicola Sturgeon's policy platform and personality that led to that defeat.
All right, I think that's pretty much it. Thanks to John and to Dougie for what was, I think, the 100th issue of Planet Holyrood.
Happy birthday, lads.
Incredible. So you can listen to this episode of Planet Holyrood on Spotify or Apple Music, or watch it on the Daily Record YouTube channel. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok. That still works, doesn't it? TikTok in the UK? Of course it does. It's the latest news and the best bits of the podcast. So thanks again.
We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.